Hey everybody, I've been so bad. I've been really super busy working on some classes and other things, getting ready for my live events. But I'm back with an interview recorded a couple years ago. Now, I haven't looked at Tony in a while, and I don't remember what he looked like when I did scan him. So I'm going to save my comments for the second half of this podcast, part two. And then I'll give a little analysis of what I currently believe, yay, nay, whatever about Tony, but he gave a really great presentation for a private class of mine, and I really appreciate it, and I want to share it with you. So without further ado, we'll just share the class as it happened for the first part one. Tony Rodrigues, Super Soldier. All right, everybody, we are going to get started with our very special guest this evening. People are still kind of coming in, so I'm going to try to keep letting them in throughout the presentation. Tony has said that he does not care if you politely interrupt, or you can type your questions in the chat box. I was going to introduce him, but I realized that what I would say would be redundant because he's going to share his story. He's also going to be controlling his own side. So I'm going to sit back and just kind of let Tony take it from the beginning. And I'm not going to give you an introduction because your whole, because that would be redundant. So let me pin Tony and we'll let him take it from there. So thanks, everybody.
Hello. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody can hear me. And I'm not familiar if anybody's aware of my story or the phenomenon that's led me to experience what I did. I'll try to explain it all as best I can. And I will say this, that anybody that listens to my story that's never heard it before, it would be strange. It would be weird if you weren't skeptical. So I embrace that. I think everybody should have a healthy amount of skepticism when they hear even half the things I'm going to say. But I haven't had anybody really engage me in a fair discussion about it because I have a mountain of evidence behind me. There has been a lot of things. I've had professional private investigators. I've had professional ufologists, researchers. I've had very profound, very well-known names in the ufology research my case, and many things that I've said have panned out, and they continue to. I'm still working on the book. The book, the edit will be done November 14th, and the book will be out, available on Amazon a couple weeks after that. So there are many things I'm still uncovering, and I'm going back and you double check things like flight times and fuel range of airplanes that I remember, and distances and addresses and animals that were indigenous to areas. And rather than going back and checking those for the book and having them conflict, they're all checking out. They're all things that I remembered, that I had memory recall, and I couldn't figure out why, or how anybody could remember these things. And they're starting to they just check out. They just keep checking out. So that's why I'm still talking about my account of things that happened. A little bit about me was that I'm a normal guy, and in 2015, the end of April of 2015, I went in and got checked out for headaches I was having, and the doctor wanted to give me a quick MRI scan of my head, and I went and got an MRI. And in less than 2 weeks after that, beginning of May of 2015, I stumbled across the Randy Kramer information on exopolitics.org, and he explained that there's a phenomenon called, they call it 20 and back. Jason Rice attributed it, called it a career return program, or a 20-year tour, that the military has access to extraterrestrial technology, and they can take people and have them serve in service, to military service, for 20 years in space on colonies inside the solar system and beyond, and then age regress them through whatever means, kind of an unknown means, with the technology they've acquired from ETs, and age regress them right back to this, and then time travel them. And here's where you get the 1,000-yard stare, but basically put them back in their bed the same night that they were taken. in the same age. So that's exactly what I remember. And when I heard that from somebody else, all of the things that I remembered that I brushed off. When did I have time to be on a spaceship? When did I have time to remember all this? It must be a dream. It must be something weird. All of those were justified all of a sudden and suddenly became possible. And once I accepted, I went, oh my God, that was real. All the memories kind of coalesced, and I spent a good 6 weeks. First 3 weeks, I got really big dumps, really big years of memories. And for about 6 weeks, I got big chunks, and then I developed methods to go back and, I went to researchers. I knew I wasn't going to get a counseling about it. And so I went to researchers and I expected it, but I didn't realize what I was getting into. But instead of helping me, they rigorously questioned me in the beginning. I worked with 3 researchers, and it wasn't a supportive thing. It was an interrogation, and it went on for almost a year. And in 2016 for exopolitics.org, I did my first interview, and then I did another one on Pyramid Radio Network, and came out with my story publicly. And then I've done interviews ever since then. Every time somebody's asked me, I've stepped up and done interviews. Since then, I've been contacted by thousands of people with similar memories that have seen my information and had it ring true. And I couldn't keep up with all the traffic after a few years, and I developed a memory course and a website with supporting evidence and free videos and a Patreon show. So I'll get to all that at the end, but I just want to let everybody know that it's taken a life of its own, and I am not the only one. Things I'm going to say can be researched, and there are many other people that have come forward with similar experience. So without that being said, I'll try to do a screen share here and get into a slideshow for you guys. Oh, I'm still disabled from participant screen sharing, Kimberly. I'll see if I can't.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Everybody knows I am not the best. It's this. I'm good at searching.
You're the best for us tonight. You are the best tonight.
You've got tonight. Mm-hmm. Wait, I can't even find your thing. Hold on. Because I got you pinned. Let's see. Reactions, breakout, share screen. Ah, multiple participants can share. Should that give it to you?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, try it. Can you try again?
There we go. I've got it now.
Yay.
So if you guys can see this, I don't know. Can you see this, Tony?
Yes. Yes. Awesome.
Okay. So let me start this. It's covered up here. It's been a while, so yeah. Anybody help me here? So that's my website, TonyRodrigues.com. I hope this doesn't have some kind of timer. It flips slides without. So my co-host on my Patreon show helped me design the site. She did website design for back in her past and was very good at it. So any kind of information, I try to log everything there. There are links to a lot of information here, to my memory course, to my book pre-sale, which in the first 10 days, we've offered them just through a crazy number because so many people were asking about it. And so I offered autograph copies for $100 plus a Zoom meeting, like a Q&A after the book comes out. And we offered 100 copies for $100. We sold half of them in the first 10 days. They're continuing to sell. I quit watching it. But like I said, the book will be out on Amazon at a more reasonable price at the end of November, hopefully beginning of December. And it's coming along well, and I'll be happy to have the damn thing done, to be honest. So my name is Michael Anthony Rodrigues, and I was born near Ann Arbor, Michigan in 1972. I'm 49 years old. I'm a wood floor refinisher by trade. I have a father of 3 daughters. Nothing real special. I live in a small town in northern Michigan, and I have a pretty normal life. That is not the reason I'm here today. The reason I'm here speaking to you tonight is because while I'm 49 years old, I have better than 69 years worth of memories. And I was able to go on the record with some of those memories and have things check out that couldn't have had I not experienced them. So there were things. So this is the house I grew up in. We had a 1/4 mile long driveway. We had 13 acres. It was a 100-year-old farm. And when I was, let me see, there's the school I was in, Lincoln Consolidated School, was the first consolidated school in the state of Michigan. And for that reason had some pretty special kids that went there. So I was part of the talented and gifted program. I was in the top 5% of kids in my 3rd grade and 4th grade. And so 1982, I was in the talented and gifted program. We met in the library every Wednesday. And there was a kid in there that came to school in a limousine, and his dad was in town to negotiate the contract between Coca-Cola and Domino's Farms in Ann Arbor back then. And we did not get along. He was smarter than me, and I wanted to be the smartest kid in the class, and we were rivals, as would be an understatement. We ended up picking on each other. And one day he said to me, "My dad's an Illuminati. What's your dad do?" And I didn't know what that meant. But later on in, I believe it was April of that year of 82, that we were in the science fair, and his father came in and was one of the judges for the science fair, and he pointed me out to him. I walked by them. He said, "Dad, that's that boy I told you about. He ruined my confidence. It's the one I hate him." And they had a weird conversation about me within earshot, but I didn't think anything of it. I was a 10-year-old kid. I just minded my own business, kept walking. And later that night, it was the fall. I believe it was the following night. I believe that was a Wednesday, and the Thursday night, I woke up in the middle of the night with one of these in my face, in my bedroom, and standing over me. And my dad was a very humorous person, always pulled jokes on us, like his April 1st was his favorite holiday. And I said, "Dad, take off the mask. You're not being funny." And I reached up and I touched its face, and it was wet and cold, and it had big pores. You could feel pores, like giant pores. And I started to scream and reacted in fear. Like I realized that there was somebody else there, and I was in fear, and I was startled, and it did something to me, and I was paralyzed. I could move my eyes, but I couldn't move the rest of my body. I couldn't make a noise. And at the end of my bed, I think 3 of these came in. They were probably 4 feet tall, 3.5, 4 feet tall. And they came to the side of my bed and lifted me off and took me to the edge of my bed. And there was a bright flash of light. And I woke up in a laboratory somewhere on a base. They explained to me it was an underground base somewhere. And they started doing medical procedures on me. They did tests that I believe they took tissue samples, and they told me they were checking me for genetics to see if I was compatible with what they wanted to do. I'll pop in. I'm just reading the chat, sorry. They said the test came back and said they were compatible. I was compatible for their program, and he explained to me I was going to be gone for 20 years, and they asked my permission. And I said, "No, I can't do that. I've got a family, my parents. I can't be 20, grow up without my mom and dad." And they explained to me that, "No, you're very lucky. You're very fortunate to be chosen. It's an extra 20 years of life, and you're going to be put back tomorrow morning like nothing happened, only you'll be much smarter and older, and you'll have experienced all this wonder. You'll help us out. Don't you want to help us out?" And at the time, I thought it was first contact. Honestly, I thought that on the news the next day I was going to see ETs, and my state of mind was that I was thrilled. I said, "Yes, I knew you guys were real, and this is going to be great. The world is going to finally have extraterrestrials to deal with. This is going to be awesome." And that's what I thought. So I was very naive, and I granted them permission. I said, "Yes." So this is the direction that my life took. So I borrowed this schematic from exopolitics.org, from studies from other guys like me, 3 or 4 other guys like me. And this is basically how I experienced my life. So how the phenomenon exactly works, I'm not sure, but it's not like I was taken and then I had 2 lives. Like, I believe in practice, I could have met myself, that I existed twice. So I believe that there may have been cloning involved. And in fact, in some government programs, I was referred to and classified as a clone. But I believe that they took me and cloned me, and then took part of my consciousness and put me in the clone so that I experienced that 20 years first, then went back to my 10, because when I got back the next morning, I felt older. I had been changed. So it was like I lived that 20 years first. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but basically this arrow down on the left was up to 10 years old. Then I was taken. And when I began that new life, I had no memory of mom and dad or where I came from. I had complete amnesia when I woke up in Inyo in the air base. And I lived for 20 years. And at the end of that time, we knew it too. Everybody knew when they were going to leave. It was kind of a holiday, and you get a send off, even though, albeit I didn't. I went back to being 10 years old, and I woke up the next morning. I had toys, and I felt completely foreign. It felt like 20 years had passed. The next morning when I went down and had breakfast with my parents and my sister, I was very disoriented. I went to school. I forgot my way around the school. I didn't know where the bathroom was. I was very disoriented the next day. So that's how I experienced it. It wasn't like there was two of me and then, I just lived my organic life. Then I went and lived my organic life. And curiously, another part of the phenomenon is that after the 20 years is up, so say 10 years old, 20, 30 years old, towards it when it was in, they found that the other people that have come forward, it's after the 20 years is over in your organic timeline that the memory recall happens. So most people don't get their memories back during the 20 years. It's only after that other existence. And what I do working with other people is I name the person by their middle name. So the other, because it's like living two separate lives, or it's a different person that has their own identity, their own experiences. Yeah, I was 10 years old. And so to Stacy, I was 10 years old, and I lived from, to 20 to 30 years old, and then put back to 10 years old. So that's how I experienced my life. And when I think back about it, like when I think to memories that are prior to 10 years old, when I think back to my 7th birthday, which I have pictures of, it feels like a very distant past to me. Like I can think of back to the 10 years old, and then it begins to be those memories of the time in the 20-year tour. So that it feels like, 9 years old was 55 years ago for me. And or 49, 50 years ago. I'm saying this wrong. I'm not going to do the math on the fly, but that's what it feels like to me. That's how I experienced it. And I found that other people I've worked with that have credible stories that many things, there are common denominators that let me know that people are legitimate in this. What I found is that they experience it the same way. When I woke up, I was in Inyo. It's just west of China Lake, an Air Force base that's famous for MK Ultra and for supposed programs involving children. So I woke up in a portable, one of those buildings there in Inyo. I got these images from Google Earth. That's where I remember being, in Inyo, and I began a MK Ultra, a trauma-based mind control program, and there were about a dozen other kids in there. All 3 of those buildings we used. One of them was an office and where we slept with cots. The other one had chairs set up with movies that we were drugged. We had helmets on that shocked us from one side to the other with 4 different nodes on each side. And as the movie changed to different scenes, different nodes would shock us in a different way. And just changed the way your brain chemistry worked, I imagine. We were given drugs and we watched the same movies over and over again. They were movies that would have Disney cartoons and songs, and then all of a sudden an animal being butchered, and back to the Disney, and then war scenes of people being murdered. And they were very disturbing videos, and it would just play for 30 minutes, and then it was on a reel-to-reel camera, and it would rewind and play again all day long for weeks on end. Then they started with like a sleep deprivation. They'd wake us up every 15 minutes at night. We were out there, nobody could hear what was going on. And it was basically a classified program. What I found, so this is the other thing, where are we at here? 2021, so like in 2019, I want to say 2020, early 2020, I had an investigator look, and he said, well, if these buildings, there has to be a paper trail for what these buildings, that these were used by a project, one of the projects, because I found funding for Project Grow Flame, which later on was Project Center Lane. These are CIA projects I found on the CIA declassified library, .gov, or I believe, online, the online declassified library. And I found the documents, the funding actually for this. So it was a spin-off. It was under the umbrella of Project Grill Flame, is what funded us. And it spun into Project Center Lane and then on to Project Gateway, which was remote viewing for the Army. But what this investigator found was that these 3 buildings here, and I said, well, that's what the ones I remember. When he went in and looked for them, there's a database with all of the tax records, the tax assessments of every structure in the United States. There's a database, and he got access to this database and looked up these buildings, and the buildings are on the blueprint, but they don't exist. There is no tax assessment for those buildings. And in fact, they're classified as a California special district. And what that means is that they are outside of the jurisdiction of local law enforcement. So if children were being abused, the local law enforcement would have no jurisdiction there and no ability to go inside those buildings and commit any kind of arrests or anything, or be a witness to anything. There are over 3,000 of these kind of buildings, special district buildings in California. And in fact, they're all over the United States. It's a very special district. Even military police, I believe, don't have jurisdiction. It's a congressional authority that it would take to go inside one of these buildings and conduct business. So it turns out that maybe it's a coincidence. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is one of those things. Maybe it's a coincidence that what I remember about those buildings, that this is that. But it turns out that whatever I remember, the things that I describe happening to me would have been perfectly legal. Who is they? So the CIA. This is where I found the information from, and that was who was conducting the research into with the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, and Stanford Research Institute. They were hiring them to do research into remote viewing and other military applications of extrasensory perception. So it was quite advanced. And the doctor who thought that he was working on mindless clones, he thought that us kids were clones. That's what he was told. And so he had no problem whatsoever committing acts of atrocity to us. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. It's in the book. But it was needless to say, it was a trauma-based mind control program. We were nothing short of tortured for upwards of 6 months. And towards the end, put through a version of remote viewing program with drugs and brought to near death. They gave us drugs that put us near death. And what they did was they were successful. And they would give us an IV. The kids that graduated into what they called the Theta program, they would give us an IV and bring us near to death, and we would channel other minds, other personalities would channel through us and give accurate information of past, present, and future events and be able to remote view. And I ended up being tasked to, let me see my next slide here. We were taken off of that tarmac one time for just a quick stay, a 1-day stay on a base that was on the backside of the moon. There was a triangular craft. Most people refer to it as like a TR-3B. It landed straight down. There were over 100 people that got on. And we went to a trapezoid base on the moon that they said looked like the Pentagon. Also, I got this image from exopolitics.org, so I want to give credit to that. This was another, I think Carolyn Hem, I forget the girl that said the same thing in her testimony, that she saw a trapezoid base. I was told, we were told on approach by the pilot when we looked out that it was a trapezoid, but it looked like the Pentagon because they were able to save money and time designing the building, because the Pentagon was designed to such strict standards that it was easily converted to be a building in a vacuum, because the Pentagon was built for nuclear war, to survive bombing attacks and nuclear war, and it had really high standards. So they just converted those blueprints and put this building. When I got there, on this trip, we could smell paint, fresh paint on the walls. It was still under construction or in a state of construction. We went there. There were getting ahead of myself. We did a few surgeries that they gave us to enhance the ability, and then we were flown right back to the Inyo Kern Airport. I woke up there the next morning. I was taken to China Lake, and then I rode on a high-speed underground train to, I believe, San Francisco, California, and then on to Helena, Montana, where I got off and was driven to one of the islands near Seattle. And I was owned by I was privately owned by a billionaire there. And it wasn't Bill Gates. Everybody assumes that wasn't Bill Gates. But I predict the name because he's got family and I've got family, and I don't want to poke the hornet's nest any more than I have to. But I have turned the name on to members of the government who have contacted me. The military, I was taken and interrogated in 2016. At the end of 2015, I was interrogated by a secret program. I was contacted by another secret program later in 2016 that received funding to rescue children that were sold off from slavery. And I worked as an advisor for a short time for them. And I've turned on all the names. So a lot of people give me flack by being quiet about who took me or who owned me at the time, but they checked out, and I've turned it all over to researchers and everything. I just don't publicly say it because I think it's in my best interest. Anyhow, I was there. They were practicing Satanists. And this is oddly enough, one of the other proofs of my account was that one of the researchers that I worked with in the beginning was also adept at researching the Satanism that goes on in the military. And there were things that I recalled about witnessing rituals while I was at the house here, while I was owned. And I described things in very high level rituals that even low practicing Satanists in the lower echelons of the satanic church are unaware of. So there were things, and I'm not a practicing Satanist. I'm actually an Episcopalian by denomination, I grew up in. But so this was one of the things in the early on, and this is 2015 and early 2016 when I went on the record with all this information. It was long before Pizzagate and the Hillary scandal and all that stuff that has been debunked time and time again, but is actually real. And it was a cornerstone of my testimony that really got the researchers to keep working with me. So I had to delete some of these slides from the scenes of what happened there because the artist didn't want me to use the slides freely anymore. They just were kind of spooked about it. I was in Seattle at that house there for that billionaire for only a few days, maybe a week. And then I was flown to my station to a small river town called Puerto Tahuantinsuyo, Peru. And what this town was on the edge. I'm gonna go back to here. So I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but on that mountain range and those rivers that connect to where you see that dot, that is the world's richest natural supply of the coca plant. And this is something I found out. I researched it after the fact, after I was on the record. But one I remember was that they were bringing boats, were coming up this river, the Madre de Dios, the Mother of God river network. I guess that's the state, like the county it's in, the state. It's a state down there. They were bringing small amounts of cocaine that were being processed in the woods and stockpiling them by the river in a warehouse there. And when they had enough of them, they had an airplane, a C-46 Commando airplane that they would fly to Santa Marta, Colombia. They used me on all of those flights. They would put me on the flight and give me the IV and the same drug that was in that laboratory in California. And I would go under. I would go into a different state, and I personally lost consciousness. I didn't remember anything, but they said that my handler that had me, that was in charge of me, said that I spoke Spanish during that time. He talked to his dead grandmother. He talked to dead people. He talked to people from the future, people from the past. And he was warned when there were police waiting and when the weather was bad on what altitude to fly and direction to fly. So I was a very valuable asset to them. They had to pay money to have me on there. I'm leaving it on this slide because that plaza, which all the towns in South America, it's like they all want one of those. That you see the Star Plaza, it's about 2 acres right there. In '83, when I was there, the first flight that I did actually paid for the bulldozers to come and build that plaza. And I did an interview in I believe Brazil in Spanish that was translated to Spanish. And people from this town contacted me and said, absolutely, that's when it was built. That it was a corroboration I was very proud of. because, you know, when you say things like this, you're not exactly sure, it's fuzzy, old memory. And then for someone to say, yes, it was built in 83, was kind of a, you know, gave me a chill of a feeling. There's the plane. It was C-46 Commando. It was a new plane when I came down because, well, it wasn't brand new, but it was new to them because the one prior to them had been lost in the mountains. So that's why they paid the extra for to have me. They had to pay for me as a service. I was like a piece of equipment, and the people that were doing the trafficking down there had to pay me through the. So when you think about the war on drugs, that the CIA, the Cocaine Import Agency, what people call it, and all the rumors of that, when you really put it into perspective, that they're putting psychic kids, artificially enhanced with ET technology from surgeries on the moon, artificially enhanced children on these planes, you can understand why the war on drugs has been a complete failure. I mean, they just outdone any kind of technology that we have. That was the inside of it. They would put me on this cot. They had these cots. This is like from an air show. This isn't the same one, but I just did it. I just grabbed this slide. Those cots and that net was exactly how I remember it. And I would lay on that cot, and he would put an IV in my arm. I have an artist rendition here. A guy named Mark Hallis, he drew that, friend of mine. He was a good artist, and he helped me out with a lot of things. But that's about how it was. They had bigger piles than that worth of cocaine in the center of the plane. And we would fly from there to Santa Marta, Colombia, about 10 hours each way. And that's another thing that I checked out on that plane, the fuel. This is what I was talking about earlier. It all checked out. The very first flight, they put me under, and he said, if you don't work, you cost a lot of money. We're going to feed you to the piranhas. And I didn't work. He said, when he put me under and we flew on that flight the first time, it was gibberish. He said, I didn't say anything of quality. It was just, I was talking in tongues. So they weren't sure if they were going to send me back or kill me or what. And they got a hold of the people that they were paying to have me. And they said that it was the EM fields from the instruments of the aircraft, that had older, very powerful EM fields, older equipment on the aircraft. And they sent down a silver mesh blanket. So there's an artist rendition of it. It was a silver mesh blanket to block out the EM fields. And he wrapped me in it on the second flight. And it worked, because when I woke up on the way home, he looked at me completely different. He was terrified of me. And for things that I said, he said, that's when he said he spoke to his dead grandmother. And he had coherent conversations with other beings that weren't me, obviously. And so I checked, and I went, a silver mesh blanket. I looked, and it turns out that that's exactly a silver mesh blanket are the early versions of Faraday fabrics. And, you know, back in the 80s, that's what they were using, was solid, real silver meshed blanket to block EM fields. So if you wrapped your phone in one, it won't work. So I checked. That was a weird thing that checked out. Clipping through here. So after I lost that ability, I was there for about 2 years in Peru, there in that town, and I got closer to puberty. I don't know if it was because they started feeding me sugar or puberty or whatever, but I started to get worse and worse at the ability, and less and more kind of gibberish. And I could tell where I lost the ability, and they sent me back to that place in Seattle. And I lived there for a couple more years, and sat in on fundraiser parties, that they would have parties for political fundraisers, local. I found documents and newspaper clippings that they had fundraisers for it. And I'm not shooting anybody down, but at the time they were Republican fundraisers for local government. And I remember setting up some of the tents of the parties. I found pictures in the newspaper. And after the party was over, it would turn into a different party with drugs and us kids as sex slaves. I went back there in 2016 after my first interview with Dr. Sella in Mount Shasta. I flew up and I went back to the home, and I went to this beach, and I remembered visiting this beach before I'd ever been there in my real life. And I knew my way around it. I knew where the rocks were, and I documented all that. It was crazy. This fence wasn't there in the 80s. It's there now. I don't want to get too much into that, but after that, they were giving us, we were doing calisthenics every day, and they were giving us a cup full of pills to take, and they changed the formula, and I had a violent reaction, allergy to some of the pills. And they said that they couldn't change back the formula to the old stuff, however it was working, or whoever. And they said if I couldn't handle it, they were going to sell me off to the military. And at that point, I was sold off to the military and flown right back to that base. This is years later, right back to that base on the moon, and trained for a support soldier role. basically I went through another version of mind control, trauma-based mind control, and it was fight or flight response that they got rid of. They put us all in an arena, and this thing was about the size of a motorcycle, or as it stretched out like a small car. It was a pretty giant bug, came in the other end, and they gave us grenades and told us to go at it and save our brothers' lives if we could. And one of the boys ran right at it and blew himself up and blew this thing up. It was terrifying. I remember when it was dead, I walked up and saw the eyes on its head like that. This was an artist rendition from a guy in Turkey, artofcon.com. Really talented artist. He drew this thing in like 10 minutes from my descriptions, and he does comic books for a living. Very, very talented, but he got a lot of it pretty close. The thing was terrifying. From there, that was a success, and we were flown on another much larger ship that was like the one I flew to the moon the first time, to Mars. We flew there, and we had to wait in orbit for a couple hours to clear the airspace to land. And as soon as we landed, they took myself and the other kid, there was a dozen of us, kids that went through the program like I did for the fight or flight response, basically to be suicide capable soldiers on a battlefield, in a battle arena, just a battlefield. And they put bags over our heads and put us on a smaller craft, and we flew to a forward base that was underground somewhere on Mars. And we did hiking missions. We did 3 hiking missions. Well, I personally did 3 hiking missions. Here's the chat. So it was a much larger ship, and it was a very short flight. So it was a flight that went there almost immediately from the moon. It was a larger craft. And the reason I say that is because sitting on it, it was just like being in an airplane. But whereas an airplane, one of the larger intercontinental flights, has 12 seats of a row, this ship had 20 or 30 seats in a 25 seats in a row. And it got bigger towards the back. It was huge. You could put hundreds of people on it, and it was not filled up. Most of the seats were empty. And the ship left the moon. We were told we were going to Mars, and we were there in about 30 minutes, and you could see it outside the window. And like I said, we did not have clearance to land. So we waited in orbit, and you could see Mars. We were orbited Mars for a few hours, 3 or 4 hours before we could land. And so it was a U.S. military craft that was capable of getting there very quickly. When we were there, like I said, I was taken and put into a smaller craft and then flown to a forward base. They had 5 or 6 levels underground, and what it was it looked like a modern junior high worth of construction, concrete with carpet and tile, with a cafeteria. There was a hospital. There was a hangar bay. There were business cubicles, like offices, and they converted cubicles, and that's where we slept. We were an experimental program. On the 3rd mission, we were engaged by more of these larger insects. We took casualties, and I had contact with this thing that was intelligent. It came up to me, and there was an interaction, and it scanned what I was and wanted to know what we were, because we weren't the typical soldiers that it was familiar with. It scanned me. I went into a dream state, and it showed me my life. It showed me Inyokern. It showed me back the base where I was from. It showed the moon. It showed Seattle. And at the very end, it showed me my living room that I was taken in, the house I was taken from, which I had no memory of at the time. And it said, "This is who you are." I was standing in my living room in Michigan, obviously in a dream state, but it said, "This is who you are. You're not here for warfare. This is what you really are." And it was narrating it to somebody else that I didn't know was there. It was telling somebody else what it was seeing in my head. And I woke up, and I was injured badly. I don't want to get into a ton of that. It's a lot of Q&A that takes up time. That's also in the book. But I was taken by soldiers back to base, and it told me to relay the message to say that we're not this stupid. And the program that I was in was canceled. They determined that the insects had adapted to the strategy of having us on the battlefield much faster than they were supposed to. So they canceled it. And I was flown, after a couple of weeks, to a city that was completely underground on Mars, a bigger city that looked very modern and very, the architecture was very advanced. and, very flowing and circular kind of cement work, and just spacious and more like a shopping mall kind of pleasing architecture. And it was a big city, but I only was in a certain area. And what they did was they gave me aptitude tests and to see what kind of job I was best suited for. And I kept failing it's like first they gave me command, and then they gave me engineering, and then they gave me, science. They gave me these tests to see if I was good, and I kept failing them and failing them. And I went to skilled labor, and I was trained for ship maintenance. Like spaceship maintenance, a lot of it was fire suppression and how to use equipment, how to use power tools was my training. And then there was a train that they put us on, they walked me to, and the train was literally the transport. It went through a portal. The train went into a tunnel and went into a portal. There was a giant, brilliant flash, like a poof, and then it started decelerating immediately. And when I got off, we had to drink water because your electrolytes, I guess, were messed. They said it was unhealthy if you didn't drink water immediately. And I was on Ceres, and what it was called was the Ceres Colony Corporation, or Ceres Colony with a K, Gesellschaft, and it was a German breakaway colony that's inside this Ceres. So Ceres is between Mars. I think I got the orbit here somewhere there. Ceres, there's the orbit of Ceres. It's in between Mars and the asteroid belt. It's actually the largest asteroid in the solar system, and it's about 587 miles in diameter. It had microgravity, but everything there had artificial gravity. There was gravity plating for literally miles. There were almost 250,000 permanent residents of humans and ETs living there, and they were governed by Germans, or the Deutsch. They did not identify as Nazis or Germans. They identified as Deutsch, and they were very proud of their history. Actually, the scene behind me here, my background, is something that was at the end of the hangar bay on Ceres Colony. The hangar bay had a rotating door. I can't point to it. Doors that would go into the trade window area. That's where we get our paychecks. And I did, towards the last couple of years I was there, earn a paycheck, and I was able to travel around the colony on trains. Everything was connected by high-speed trains. Trying to get as much out there as I can. They had been there for a long time. Their architecture was old. They'd been there for going on 100 years, better than 60, 70 years. There was a lot of the buildings were rusting.
Okay, there you have it. Part 1. Please like and subscribe. Follow me on my YouTube, Kimberly McGeorge, Secret to Everything. Check out my website, secrettoeverything.com. And hopefully I will see you soon. And we will get this podcast going with some good guests. Run into some situations with that, which I'll tell you about later. So thank you so much.